Okay, guys, sorry for keeping you waiting. A couple of people have told me they won't be able to join tonight, so I'll just send them the recorded video. So I hope your day has been good. There's a lot of fireworks going on around me. I don't know what's it like around you. So you might be hearing some background noise. It's fireworks going on around me here. We shall be continuing from where we stopped yesterday. Yesterday we spoke about, we're still on information security management. As you can see, we still have a long way to go. So we need to start moving very, very fast so we can cover grounds. I think yesterday we stopped at benefits of ISO 27001. And then yesterday I introduced the concept of the PDCA cycle to you guys, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And I showed you guys how you can use that to implement ISO 27001 project. Could you please mute from your side? Just press the microphone button. It go red, so that means you are mute. If it turns red, please mute from your end, please. Thank you. So I was saying that yesterday I introduced the concept of PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, and that it's a method that is used in various industries, and that's the method we also utilize in implementing ISO 27001. So today, if you have your framework with you, the ISO 27001 standard that I sent to you guys, I did ask you guys to print it out because it's going to be very, very handy. We shall be referring to it today. So if you have it with you, that's what we're going to be using tonight. Because what I'm trying to do is to explain all the clauses in this standard, to explain what it means, so you can have an understanding of what it is. So by the time we get to the practical side of things, when we roll our sleeves up to start doing stuff, so I mean these things shouldn't be new to you again. And then yesterday, I remember I spoke about the structure of this framework, ISO 27001. It is divided into two parts. The first part of it is clauses. These clauses, they are like requirements. So if any organization is looking towards ISO 27001 certification, those are the requirements that they must meet. And I did mention that one word that comes out from this standard is the fact that they use the word shall. So if you read through that document, you're going to see the organization shall, the risk assessment document shall. So what they're trying to tell you is it is a must. So it is a must for you to, follow anything they say you must document it, because if you don't comply with that shall, by the time you get to the point of certification, when an assessor comes to your organization, an external auditor comes to your organization to come and audit your ISMS. So if you are found wanting, if they find out that you don't have the complete documentation, they will turn you down. They're not going to give you the certification. So every time you see the word shall, that means it is a must. Okay, and then I explained that it's got we have clauses in the first part of the document, and then the other part is where we have the controls. In total, it is the controls. We have 114 controls divided into 14 sessions. Okay, so there are just two parts. So I'm not touching the second part today because of our time. I don't think we can get there. But I just want to talk you through the clauses in ISO 27001. So our agenda for today is about ISMS implementation. Yesterday, I think I'm not quite sure if somebody did mention that ISMS, it's a project on its own. It's called an ISMS implementation project. So if you're coming from a project management background, you have an advantage here. If you have a project management background, so with that, you already know about the Prince2 methodology, so you can apply that in this space as well. Because with ISMS project, you have the project manager, although in most cases, the project manager might double as the information security officer. So the project manager might double as the information security officer. You have your project team, you have the top management. The top management too are part of your project team, because without the commitment from top management, you cannot implement an ISMS project. So yeah, those are the resources that you need, and of course, you need the whole organization to cooperate with you, because most of what the output of this project is going to affect the whole organization, and there's no point you implementing something and then the organization are not going to, everybody's not going to make use of it. So that means that's going to be a waste of effort and time. So that's what the project team comprises of, but mainly it's about the project manager, the information security analyst, and then of course the project team. Maybe you have supporting officers who are supporting you here and there. But in big organizations, the project manager is different from the information security officer. But in small and medium enterprises, in most cases, you will double as the project manager as well as the information security analyst. That means you will still follow all your regiment as a project manager, doing the scoping, doing the scoping, the PID, and all of those things. You still need to do all of that, and then the project plan, the reporting and all those things. And then, of course, on the other side of it, you need to, this understanding, this knowledge you're picking up from here now, that will help you, you know. Yeah, so just to mention that. So if you have a project management background, you're at an advantage here. So going straight into clause 4.1, if you open your document to page 1, if you open your document to page 1, that's where we have the clause 4.1. And like I mentioned, these are requirements. These are the things that you must do. If you look at the top left corner, you can see the planning phase. Remember, I said we have the plan, do, check, and act. Plan, do, check, and act. So this is the planning phase. Okay. So the planning phase, there's a lot of planning that goes into an ISMS project, and that's what I'll be talking you through in the next 1 hour or so. So the first clause here is 4.1. Analyze the external and internal issue that could influence the information security in your company. Ensure issues relating to the external environment of the organization is taken into consideration when defining the ISMS. Now, it's very, very important that you analyze the external and internal issue. It's very important for you to understand the context of the organization. For instance, if you find yourself working in a pharmaceutical environment, maybe a pharmaceutical company has employed you as an information security officer, or to come and lead a project which they're about to implement a security project, so they ask you to come and lead it. You need to have an understanding of the context of that organization, in the sense that, like, a pharmaceutical company is, it's a heavily regulated company. That organization will be heavily regulated. That industry, the pharmaceutical industry, is heavily regulated. So you need to be aware of all the regulations, all the directives, all the laws that pertains to that industry. You need to have an understanding of it. On the other hand, if you are going to be leading an ISMS project, if you're part of the team, the project team, maybe it's in the health sector, in the education sector, you must have an understanding of the regulations around that sector as well. And all the regulation, especially as it relates to information security, you need to have an understanding of it. So you must look at that. You must try and understand the organizational, the context of the organization. External context may include legal and regulatory environment or the competitive environment. Internal context is anything within the company that could influence the way the company deals with information security, organizational structure, value system, ICT infrastructure, available resources. In SMEs, in small and medium enterprise, you need to understand their culture. You get to know, maybe by your first meeting, when you're meeting their chief exec, when you're meeting with top management and they're discussing security with you, from their responses, when you begin to ask them questions. So when you look at their information security policy, when you look at their objectives, you get to know that, okay, these people, they are serious with security, or maybe these people, they have nonchalant attitude to security. You don't want to work with those kind of people, because you need their commitment. So if they are not giving you 100% support, there's every tendency that the ISMS project is going to fail. So in order for the ISMS to be effective, it must be aligned to the company's culture and strategy. And for you to understand the strategy, that means you need to talk to the top guys there, because the board, those are the people that formulate the strategy of the organization. They determine the direction of the organization. So you need to understand their strategy. So, and you must make sure that your ISMS is aligning with their strategy. Okay, so that's clause 4.1 there. Moving on to the next one now, 4.2. Understand the needs of interested parties. Determine the interested parties that are significant for the information security in your organization: clients, suppliers, employees, local authorities, and partners. You can imagine if you are working for an organization and then the organization you're working for is a supplier, maybe to a multinational organization. And then so maybe that multinational organization shares some sensitive data with your own organization. So you need to understand their requirements. What do these people want from us? Okay, okay. You can imagine the supplier. When it comes to you getting your bank statement, your credit card statement from the post, I hope you're aware that those bank statements, they are not coming from your bank directly. They are actually coming from a third party. They would have outsourced that service to a third party. For instance, now if you bank with Barclays and then maybe you request for your statement of account, they tell you, oh, you're gonna get it in 2 weeks, and you're wondering why is it gonna take 2 weeks? Why is it gonna take 10 working days before I get my statement of account? It's because they don't offer that service directly. They would have outsource that service to a third party supplier. So that third party supplier must take into consideration the security requirement of Barclays. So if you find yourself working for that third party supplier, saying, okay, maybe you were brought in to come and work as an information security officer to come and help them with their ISMS project. So you need to understand what Barclays wants, because Barclays is your major client. You are working for the supplier. So that's why you need to understand the interest of all third parties. You need to understand the interests of all third parties, the suppliers, the clients, the employees, the local authority, the partners. Perhaps if you are, I remember when I used to work as a project coordinator for a company. That company has about maybe five branches. We have about two branches in the UK, and then one or two branches in the continent in Europe, and then one other branch in America thereabouts. But the truth is, back then, that company I was working for, it's just a small and medium enterprise, but they get contracts from various places around the world. So you would have thought that, oh, this company must be a very large organization. They get jobs in Japan, they get jobs in the Middle East, they get job in Africa, you know. But they don't have offices in those places. But what happened is they have partners in those places. They have signed a memorandum, or they will have signed a contract with most of those partners around the world. Now, if you are working for each or any of those partners, you need to take into consideration the security requirement of the main company that is hiring your company or that is contracting your company. If you get what I'm saying here. So they're like, okay, there's a company in the UK, there's another company in Paris. So if you're working for a company in the UK, and then the company in the UK is getting jobs, is getting contracts from the company in Paris, you need to put into consideration the security requirement of that company in Paris. So you need to put that into context as well. So that's what it means to understand the you need to understand the interest of all the parties that are involved. Remember, this is a requirement as part of you implementing an ISMS that will lead your organization to get certified, for them to get that certification. Okay, you need to determine their requirement regarding information security. Only when you know what the requirements are, then you can start configuring your ISMS to align with the interest of all parties involved. So you have taken into consideration the legal requirement, you have taken into consideration your clients, you have taken into consideration your partners, you have taken into consideration the internal context within your own organization. So you're going to pencil all of that down. So it is when you know all those, when you have all those information, that's when you can now begin to think, okay, so how do I tailor this our ISMS? In what direction are we going to go? Because without those information, you are just going to be walking blindly. Clause 4.2 requires this analysis to be conducted, but it does not require it to be documented. Take note of that. It does not require it to be documented. So what that means is, best practice requires that you document it, but in terms of you applying for your certification, when an auditor comes to your firm, to your organization, to audit you, to assess you, for them to see if you are qualified for that certification, they wouldn't be asking for that documentation. They will never ask you, so did you put into consideration the interests of all parties that are involved? Can I see where you wrote it? They are not going to ask you that. So that's what it means. That's what it says. That's why it says it does not require it to be documented. Determine the scope of the ISMS. It's a very, very important one for you to determine the scope of the ISMS, because the larger the organization, the more complex the ISMS project is going to be. The larger the organization, the more complex. So what normally happens is they divide it into segments. They divide it into segments. So in large organizations, you're going to have a project manager, you're going to have an information security officer, you're going to have maybe the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, all those people. So they will have divided the organization into various segments. So they can say, you know what, we just want to face our sales department, or we want to face our HR. We just want to face our HR. And when you get the certification, I'm going to show you. Please remind me. I'm going to show you what the certificate looks like. I'm going to show you a real life example of ISO 27001. I'm going to show you what a certificate looks like. So in that certificate, you are going to see the scope. You are going to see the scope there. They will tell you this certificate covers. They could say it covers the HR of this organization. So it could just cover one department. So you need to understand the scope. You need to understand the boundary. You need to understand the boundary. Think about the activities that are carried out in your organization and the activities performed by other companies such as partners, associates, or outsourcing companies. So if for instance, if your scope is just the sales department, and that sales department, maybe they have other partners that they work with, maybe a courier company, they have a supplier who is a courier who helps them with their courier stores and all of that. So you need to pull all of that into consideration. Otherwise, you could have a single point of failure around that place here. So you need to put all of that into consideration. Think about how these activities depend on each other and how they are related. Think about how all these activities depend on each other and how they are related. Consider the complexity of the organization and their adaptation to change. ISMS implementation for SMEs will be easier, whilst that of a multinational will be complex. It will be complex. So the smaller the organization, the easier it is to implement ISMS for them. The standard requires the scope to be documented, so that's a requirement out there. So you have to document the scope. Yesterday I showed you a list of 12 requirements. 12 requirement document. Remember, I told you ISMS, information security management system, is about policies, it's about procedures, it's about guidelines, it's about processes. Okay, so I showed you those 12 lists. This one of them, the number one there, is the scope. So you must tell us this scope is covering so place. For instance, let me go to, if I show you I showed you this yesterday. So if you look at this now, this says disastercharity.org, customer service operations. So if you're going to be working on this, so the scope of your ISMS is just the customer service operations. So you're not going beyond that. This is not the whole organization. This is just the customer service operations. They have their HR. They have their legal. Okay, they have other departments. They have people on the field. So they have other departments. But with this organization, this is their customer service operation. So we could say, okay, this is the scope. This is the boundary. So now you understand the boundary. So, and then once you understand the boundary, you can begin to tell the assets that are in scope. So all of these assets now, they are in scope. So any asset that is outside of what you can see right now is out of scope for you. Is out of scope for you. So you could be approached by maybe a senior manager approached you, and then they're asking you a question about a particular asset in one data center. Or you could tell them, oh, I'm sorry, that is out of scope for me. So what I'm dealing with, what I'm concentrating on, is the customer service operations. And by the time you finish the project, when you get the certificate, it's going to be written boldly on the certificate that this certificate covers the customer service operations only. Okay. Yeah. So that's what the scope. So ISMS scope document includes a list of services, products that the company provides, the locations in scope, the boundaries. The locations in scope, the boundaries, because you have companies, you have organizations that have offices around the world. So you need to understand the locations that are in scope. Or which location is the headquarter in scope? Is the network operation center in scope? Is that one in scope? They will tell you. So you need to understand. That's the first thing you need to do. And then the boundaries. You can see the boundaries too. So anything outside of those boundaries is out of scope for you. Leadership and commitment. This is very, very crucial with any ISMS implementation project. It is going to fail if you don't have the support of leadership. This clause covers three aspects: the leadership and commitment, information security policy, organization roles and responsibility. Establishing information security policy and objective is the responsibility of the board. Like I showed you a triangle yesterday. The information security policy, the objective is the responsibility of the board. They are trying to tell you, oh, this is how we perceive information security in this organization. Every organization have their own information security policy. Every organization. If you get to work on Monday, you can go and look at your maybe go and look if you have a policy hubs, if you have suite of policy, it will be there somewhere on the intranet of your organization. Go and look at it. You might have, in most cases, when you start a new role, they tell you you need to read these policies, you need to read that policy. You just glance through it and just click yes, you just acknowledge, and then you just close it. You don't have time for it. But I want to encourage you, go and read the information security policy of your own organization. It's going to summarize how your organization perceived information security. Okay, and that will form the basis. If you're going to be working on an ISMS project, that policy, that objective, that information security policy and objective is going to form the basis. It's going to help you tailor make your ISMS project. Ensuring availability of resources necessary for the ISMS project, e.g., people and budget. Again, for the ISMS project to be successful, you need resources. They need to give you resources. You need people to work on the project, and you need budget as well, because the output of, by the time you do your risk assessment, and then the output of that is that you're going to see some action plans that you need to do, and you will need resources to do them. You will need budget to do them. Okay, communicating the importance of ISMS throughout the organization. Lead by example. That's the responsibility of leadership. That's the responsibility of leadership. They have to lead by example. So if the password policies, if the password policy organization says your password must be 10 characters and you must use 2 or 3 special characters, so the CEO cannot tell the IT guys and say, you know what, I don't want to use any password, just make my own system blank so that I can just log in straight away. He wouldn't be leading by example. So he too has to comply with that policy. So his own password too has to be 10 characters. So it doesn't matter if he's the chief executive, he's the chairman of the board. It doesn't matter. He has to comply with that policy. So making sure that the ISMS is integrated with the company processes and procedure. Now, your ISMS, the Information Security Management System, is not separate. It's not a separate, by the time you finish this project, it's not going to be separate from the day-to-day operations of the organization. It has to be integrated into it. It has to be integrated into day-to-day operations. It has to be integrated into their processes and procedures. Promote continuous improvement of the ISMS through dedicated emails, suggestion boxes, and brainstorming sessions. Now, it is the responsibility of the leadership to promote continuous improvement. It is the responsibility of the leadership. Leadership commitment is crucial for the success of the ISMS project. Without them, the ISMS will most likely fail. The standard requires leadership commitment but does not require it to be documented or how it will be done. Again, this is at your discretion. This is at your discretion. You don't have to document it. But your first 1 week, your first 2 weeks on the ISMS project, you will have been able to perceive if the leadership is committing to the project. If they are not giving you the budget you need, if they are not giving you the resources that you need, if they're having a cold feet towards the ISMS project, then that means they are not demonstrating. That means leadership is not. They are not committed to that, and that ISMS is not going anywhere. It's going to fail at the end of the day. Okay, so leadership and commitment. That's clause 5.1. So the standard expects the leadership to commit to the ISMS project. Information security objectives and planning. As you can see on the left hand side, we are still in the plan phase. Remember the PDCA cycle, the plan, do, check, act. So everything we're still talking about is still about the plan phase. Information security objective is important because they represent the basis for continuous improvement of the ISMS, and it defines the priorities for security management. And I think there's an example there which I'm going to talk about in a minute. The objective can be set for the whole ISMS or specifically for particular controls, department, processes. They should be aligned to the information security policy. They should be easy to measure in order to be able to monitor the progress of their achievement. They should be communicated to all interested parties. So if you look at the example I put here, for example, a decrease in the number of incidents by 20% in the following year. This is an objective. Okay, there is a way they monitor and measure. They monitor incidents. So on monthly basis, there's what we call the metrics. Part of the report that the information security manager is going to be providing the top management on monthly basis is the security metrics. We call it metrics. So that metrics is like figures. So they want to know. So how many incidents did we have? What happened this in this month? Is there any phishing attack? What happened? So if there's any incident, was it recorded? So what happened? Was it treated? And all those. So they want to know. So this objective is saying they want the incident to reduce by 20% in the following year. That's an objective. Okay. So this objective includes description, and then it is measurable. It includes description, and then it is measurable because it says 20%. Okay, and then the time frame is 1 year. So to ensure the objective is met, management must assign resources and define deadline for completion. So if they want the number of incidents to reduce by 20% in the following year, perhaps they need to recruit more information security officer. Perhaps they need to arrange more training awareness for people so that people will not be clicking, they will not be opening unsolicited emails, so that people will be aware of information security as they carry out their day-to-day activities. So they must do something. So you can't just wish it. You can't just say, I wish that we have decreased, that I wish that the number of incidents decreased by 20% in the following year. You can't wish it. So you have to put action into it. Okay. So and that requires the leadership to commit to that. So that's what it means by information security objectives and planning. Resources. The standard requires companies to identify the needed resources for the ISMS and to ensure that they are available for everyday operations as well as for the continuous improvement of the ISMS. We are now in clause 7. Clause 7 is on page, I think I jumped one. I'm going to go back to it. Clause 7, I jumped clause 6. Clause 6 is the risk assessment. I'm going to go back to it in a minute. Clause 7 is talking about resources. Page 5 of your document. Okay, it is impossible to run the ISMS without the appropriate resources. Providing resources a top management responsibility. This also is not required to be documented. I've mentioned this as well. I've mentioned this earlier on, that you need resources. Resources are needed for your ISMS project, because ISMS project will bring about change in your organization. It will change their business processes. It will change procedures. It will involve the IT guys to implement stuff. So every part of the organization, they are going to feel the effect of the ISMS project. And for that to happen, you need resources. And it is the responsibility of the management to provide those resources. Okay, so this is like a guideline for you. This is like a checklist for you. So by the time you find yourself working as an information security officer, or you find yourself working as a project manager in a security project, okay, so this is like a checklist for you. So you're checking all these things. Oh, do I have the commitment? Do I have the resources? Do I have the information security objective? Do I have the information security policy of this organization? So this is like a guideline for you. So the standard itself does not require you to document it. So when they say you are not required to document it, so that means when an auditor comes to your organization to audit you, to assess your organization, okay, he or she, the auditor, will not be asking for a document relating to resources. They wouldn't be asking for that because it is not required. Okay. If the management has an objective to increase the awareness training for staff by 2 hours, then they must hire a security consultant, or the information security office will have to take up the responsibility. So whenever they have an objective, there must be something that will back it up. Like I said, you are not just going to wish. You can't wish it. Okay, so something has to be done. It's either they go and hire a security consultant, or they delegate that responsibility to the information security office. Clause 7.2, the standard requires the organization to define the necessary skills to perform activities and to ensure the appropriate employees are trained and experienced. The standard requires the organization to define the necessary skills within your organization. Of course, there are some standard resources that are needed, even for the day-to-day operations, for the day-to-day running of the organization. The IT guys, maybe the guys in the desktop team, the IT operations, the network engineer, the system administrator, the database administrator, all of those people, they are, these are standard people. All the skills has to be defined. Okay, we need 2 network engineers, we need 2 server engineers, we need 1 database engineer, we need that. All of that needs to be identified. The organization should ensure the employees acquire the necessary competencies, e.g., organizing in-house training. That is why you will see organization, when you tell them I want to go for that training, they are always willing to pay. They are always willing to say, oh, you want to go for that training, we're going to pay for you. Okay. So, I mean, most organizations, they offer that to their employees. So, because it is to their own advantage, because when you are trained, that means you have the necessary skills. And you can see here, the organization must keep records of these competencies. That is proof of attendance of training courses. Because when an auditor comes to your organization, they are going to ask and say, okay, these guys that are running, these guys that are keeping the light on in your organization, these network guys, all these guys, these engineers that you have there, can you show me the proof that they have the necessary skills? They have the skills to do their job. So you must keep a record of it. You must keep a record of it and say, oh, these are the training courses they've attended in the last 1 year. Oh, that engineer there is a certified Microsoft engineer. That other person there is a Cisco engineer. That other person is this. That other person is that. Okay. So with that, you are convincing the auditor that all your staff, they have the necessary skills to perform their activities. Okay. So, but you can have a perfect documentation, and you can have perfect documentation and controls in place. But if you don't know how to put the rules and controls into practice, then security will fail. We have said this right from the beginning, that information security is not just about technology, but it's about the people, the processes, and how they interact with technology. So no matter how much you spend on your ISMS project, if you don't know how to put the rules and control into practice, the people have to practice it. They have to put it into practice. Otherwise, the ISMS project will fail. 7.3. The standard requires all persons working for the company to be aware of information security policy of their role and the impact they have on the ISMS. So also the consequences if they don't follow the rules. Method of awareness include emails, newsletters, in-house training, discussion groups. The standard does not require documenting the awareness activities, but you can create an awareness plan. I mean, you agree with me that your first day, your second day, your first week at work, you would have, by the time you open your email, you would have had loads of emails waiting for you, and you clicking on those things is going to tell you, oh, you have this policy is waiting, that is waiting, you need to go and do this training, you need to go and do that training. Some organizations already have some videos, some videos that was made for their organization, which you need to watch, everything about them, their information security policy. So they need to make it available, and then they need to let you know the implication as well, the consequences of not following the rules. They need to let you know. So in-house training, some organization, they arrange for in-house training for their staff, maybe once in a year or twice in a year, depending on the sensitivity of their environment. Okay, so all of these things is just to create awareness. All of these things is just to create awareness. You can have perfect policies and procedures, but if people don't understand which document they should follow and why these security rules are needed, then ISMS will not work. So even if you spend effort in writing those policies, you put in a lot of effort, to write a procedure. If they don't follow it, if people don't understand what they need to do, the ISMS will not work. Communication is the essence of understanding, and understanding what is happening with the security is the key for the success of the ISMS. The standard requires companies to define their needs for internal and external communication relevant for information security, and define when and what should be communicated by whom. Also, again, the standard does not require this clause to be documented, although it is a good practice. In large organizations, the CISO is responsible for communicating the information security policy and objectives of all employees. So should there be a security breach, the company PRO will be the person to talk to external parties, and the media. In smaller organizations, all of these functions will be done by the CEO. Now, all of this is all about communication. It has to be planned. It's not that organization will wait until there is an incident before they will now start scrambling and start saying, oh, who is going to talk to the press? Who is going to talk to the media? Who is going to do this? All of that would have been defined. It has to be defined. That's part of the requirement. That's part of the requirement of ISO 27001. It has to be defined. Of course, the Chief Information Security Officer is the one that, it's the one that communicates information security policy and objectives to all employees. But when there is an incident, I'm sure you have seen I'm sure you have seen one or two occasions when you see people when there's a security breach in large organizations, somebody will just come up and then they will start downplaying it, and they will start telling you, well, we're in control of it, blah 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 blah. That person will have been assigned that responsibility before that incident. So it could be the PRO, it could be the public relationship officer of the organization. But in smaller organizations, the CEO doubles as the PRO, is the everything. The CEO is the everything. In small and medium enterprise, is the everything. But what I'm just trying to tell you here is that communication is very key, because you wouldn't even know what is happening with the success of the ISMS if there is no effective communication within the organization. That's communication. That's clause 7.4. 7.5. Now, documented information. There are two types of information. Information that provides guidance on how processes are conducted, e.g., policies and procedures, and then evidence of performed activities or achieved results, e.g., records, emails, paper forms, logs in software. So this is the two types of information that you're going to have. Okay, the first one there is the policies, the procedure, the policies you wrote, the procedures you wrote, and then the other one is already performed evidence of performed activities. When an email has been sent, the paper forms that have been completed, the logs, the system logs from an application. Every time people interact with the application, that logs are automatically being generated. So those logs, they are records. Now those logs, they are useless if nobody is auditing them, if nobody is checking those logs. For instance, if you have a server where sensitive and confidential information about the business is stored, maybe the HR server where they have the remunerations of the board, all their remunerations, their salaries and remunerations, where they are being kept. That kind of a place, they will be monitoring that kind of server. So if anybody gain access to that server, they will always review the logs of those kind of servers. They will always, they maybe someone top there, maybe the CISO or whatever, they will always review the logs of that server just to make sure that they are monitoring the people that are gaining access to that particular server. So that's the document on its own. Okay, so organizations are to observe the following when creating and updating a document: ensure there is appropriate identification and description, such as title, date, etc. So what that means is each of these documents is not just plain. You're not just going to, of course, with computer generated logs, it's going to have identification and all those things, maybe the IP address, the time, the person that accessed the system at that time, all of that will be generated automatically. But with emails and paper forms, make sure that you have all these things there. Okay, make sure you have all these things. Make sure the appropriate formats and media are used for documenting. Ensure it is available when needed and adequately protected. Version control must be implemented as well. So if you have a new version of the document, you must make sure version control is implemented. Label appropriately. Identify records required by the law and maintain those records as the law requires. Okay, there are some records in the financial industry that maybe the law requires them to keep it for at least 50 years. Okay, so those kind of records must be kept as long as the law requires. Organizations should control information from external origin that are relevant to the company, e.g., customer email. When your organization is obtaining personal data from the public, you must control it. You're not just going to treat it anyhow. It must be controlled. Again, the standard does not require the procedure to be documented. So the auditor is not going to come and start asking you, show me where you documented it. However, they will be asking you, okay, where is your log? Can I see your log? As when was the last time this log was reviewed? Okay, so they are going to be checking all your paperwork. So they will check the date. Is it in date? For instance, your policies has to be, if your policy is more than 1 year old, that is out of date. Okay, they will check that the policy is signed. They will check the date. They will check the date that it was reviewed. The date the policy was reviewed. They will check all of that. These are some of the stuff the auditor will be checking when it comes to to audit your organization. However, the procedure for the documentation is not required to be documented. Okay, so this is the main one for today, risk. We're going to go into risks today, even though this risk here is different from, because my intention is to take you guys through risk management from the perspective of ISO 31000. I haven't introduced you to that framework at all. The one we've been talking about is ISO 27001. Hopefully by Friday we will be able to go into that. So, but this risk assessment is still very, very vital as well. So this is kind of introduction for you. By the end of this class, you will have an understanding of how to perform or how to conduct a risk assessment. So if you look at, because risk, to be honest with you, ISMS project is about risk. 80% of ISMS project is about risk. So if you don't know how to do a risk assessment, you will not be able to manage an ISMS project. So your attention is needed, please. So please just follow me. So I'm just going to take you through the step by step now. So I've just gone back to page 6.1 there. That's yeah, page 3. 6.1.2, page 3, information security risk assessment. Information security risk assessment. So please just follow me here. Remember, we're still in the plan phase. We're following the plan, do, check, act cycle. That's what we're using. Plan, do, check, act. We're still in the plan phase. Okay, so we're not doing anything yet. We are still planning it. We're still planning the ISMS project. So risks are referred to as unwanted events that could have a negative impact to the information security and to the company. E.g., flood might destroy paper information. Again, you can imagine if this is their archive of this customer service operation center. You can imagine if archives where they store, where they archive all their records and all those things. You can imagine if this archive is in the basement of a building, and that building is located in a region that is prone to flooding. Okay, and that building is in a region that is prone to flooding and this archives is in the basement of that building, of this building where these customer service operations are. So that means this building is prone to flooding. So that means if this place gets flooded, all of these archives, these paper records, they will get destroyed. They will get destroyed. So that's a risk for you there. So any unwanted event that could have a negative impact to the information security and to the company. Any unwanted event, anything that could have a negative impact to the information security of the company. For example, flood, as I mentioned, flood can destroy paper information. Opportunities refers to the action that the company could take in order to improve the information security of the organization. For instance, if they hire a trained information security expert like that's an opportunity for them. So if they get a budget to say, you know what, we want to increase the number of the team, the information security team, we want to increase them. We want 2 more people to join the team. So that's an opportunity for them because that will help them to improve the information security of the organization. Identifying, documenting, and managing risk and opportunities is key for successful ISMS because it helps organizations to see the weakness and strength of their business operations and use that in building effective information security. So, identifying and documenting and managing risk is key. Everything about risk has to be documented. It is a key requirement with ISO 27001. It is a key requirement. When an assessor, when you finish with the ISMS project, and then you go and invite the assessor to come and audit your organization, one of the key things they're going to be asking for is all documentation that's relating to risk management. Okay, so everything you're going to be doing about risk management has to be documented. It is a key requirement. And like I said, risk management is like 80% of the ISMS project. It's 80%. So this is the risk management process, which I'm going to talk about them one after the other. So the first thing there is the risk assessment methodology. The company, your organization, they have to determine what sort of methodology they want to use for their risk assessment. Reason is because the result has to be consistent. They need to have consistent results. Okay, so they need to determine the risk assessment methodology. After that, you go to risk assessment. People confuse risk management with risk assessment. And then when you say risk analysis and risk evaluation, some people might think, oh, yeah, are they the same thing? Are we referring to the same thing? You're going to find out very shortly. They are not the same thing at all. Risk analysis is like saying you want to find out how serious is this risk. This risk that you have identified, how serious is it? The risk evaluation, it's like you are when you are evaluating the risk, you want to look at it from the perspective of risk appetite. I will tell you what risk appetite is in a minute. So you want to evaluate the risk and say, okay, what are we going to do about this risk now? You need to find out how serious the risk is first, and then you're going to be asking the question, what are we going to do about this risk? Is this risk acceptable? What do we do about it? So risk treatment. After the risk assessment is the risk treatment. The risk treatment, we're going to talk about the various kind of treatments that can be applied to risk. Statement of applicability, I'm going to be talking about that as well. There's a table there. And then the risk treatment plan. The risk treatment plan. So this is the process for risk management. This is the process for risk management. By the time you do all of this, by the time you get to this end here, I tell you what, you are already like maybe 60 to 70% completed with your ISMS project, because the moment you can get to this risk treatment plan, then you are almost done. You are almost done with your ISMS project. But this is the whole process, the risk management process, risk assessment methodology, risk assessment, risk treatment, statement of applicability, and risk treatment plan. I'm going to talk about each of these in a couple of slides to come now. Okay, risk management is the critical first step in ISO 27001 implementation project. Risk management is a process for dealing with risk, including identifying risk, assessing risk, and treating the risk. In order to have a successful risk management, organizations must define the steps and rules for managing risk. This process consists of 5 steps here. So you define the risk assessment methodology. This will ensure a consistent result. The methodology must be documented. The organization must set the criteria for conducting risk assessment and criteria for accepting the risk. In reality, risk cannot be completely eliminated, so the organization needs to define its appetite for risk. So what that means is, no matter how much you treat a risk, I'm going to talk about risk treatment very soon. So no matter how much you treat a risk, you cannot, in real life, you cannot eliminate risk. So risk cannot be zero. You can imagine, okay, just imagine a scenario whereby back home you have houses with fences, with iron bars, with gates, and all those things. The sole purpose of that is to prevent intruders from coming into the house. But you agree with me that in most cases, despite all those iron bars, despite all those security, thieves, intruders still get access into the house. So that tells you that even though you've tried to treat the risk, you've tried to apply various controls so that robbers or intruders will not gain access into your house. But despite all of that, they still gain entrance into your house. So that tells you that you cannot completely eliminate risk. Risk cannot become zero. You cannot apply a control and now say, oh, it is now zero, so let's go and sleep. All is well. No. So risk cannot be completely eliminated. So the organization needs to define their appetite. To define the appetite is, what kind of risk can we accept? That is the acceptable risk. What kind of risk can we accept? So all of this needs to be defined. So this has to be documented. So you managing the ISMS project, you need to have an understanding of the risk appetite of the organization. Okay, this example here says, for example, losing the data processed in the last 4 hours is probably an acceptable risk for an SME, but for a mobile company, the same amount of data might not be an acceptable risk, because they might not be able to charge their customer for those 4 hours. So you can imagine a mobile company that has millions of customers, and these millions of customers are making use of their network per second, and then suddenly they are going to lose 4 hours. They're going to lose 4 hours. Data processed in the last 4 hours, they are going to lose it. That is not an acceptable risk for them. It is not. But to a man who is to a small and medium enterprise, maybe it's a small company of 5 people. What do they do there? They do money transfers to various countries. They're on the high street, maybe on Oxford Street. They do money transfer. It's a one-man business, but the person has like five employees or whatever. Okay, so if they lose the data they've processed in the last 4 hours, it will just, oh, they'll say, oh man, that's a waste of effort. We have to start all over again, blah blah blah. It might not be too disastrous for them. It's not the end of the world for them. But for a mobile communication company, for them to lose the data processed in the last 4 hours, that will be millions for them. So that is not acceptable risk for them. Okay, so that's their risk appetite which they have set there. That's the risk appetite there. So you need to understand the risk appetite of your organization, the organization you're working for. You need to understand the acceptable risk. And of course, you know that when it comes to when it comes to regulations, that you need to comply with, you can't say, well, if the law says you have to protect personal data, you can't lower your bar. Your bar cannot be lower than that. Otherwise, you're gonna fine your organization, or otherwise they're gonna file a criminal charge against your organization. So you have to balance it. You have to make sure that your acceptable risk is not lower than what the regulation is saying. It's not lower than what you are supposed to be complying with. Okay, so it's your responsibility to make sure that you understand what the regulation is saying. You look at the risk. So if the risk appetite of the organization is too low, you might tell them, oh, your risk appetite is too low. That's not acceptable. If this risk should materialize, we might get fined. Okay, so this is part of the things that, it's a major task when it comes to implementing ISMS project. Okay, so that's the risk appetite there, and I've just talked about risk cannot be completely eliminated. We call it residual risk. So after we have applied a control, after you have implemented a control, the risk that is remaining, what you have left, is the residual risk. So that residual risk, you must make sure that is within the risk appetite of your organization. Just from the word residual, what you have left. So we found a risk, and then but there's a residual risk here. But is that acceptable? Oh yes, it is. It is acceptable. Okay, so if it is acceptable, that means it is within the risk appetite of the organization. Risk identification. According to ISO 27001 standard, the risk assessment should include the following elements. Risk identification: identifying the assets of the company and the related threats and vulnerabilities of those assets. Identifying asset means identifying what needs to be protected: the hardware, the software, the information in electronic form or paper, infrastructure, or people. If you look at this, can you identify the what's it called here now? 1 second. It says identifying the assets of the company and the related threats and vulnerability. Identifying asset means identifying what needs to be protected. So can you, from what you're saying now, can you identify what needs to be protected? Can you identify what needs to be protected from what you're seeing on your screen right now? Can somebody unmute and tell me what needs to be protected here from this organization we're looking at?
The hardware, the people. So the IT elements in the screen. So all your PCs, switches, firewall, and the personnel.
Okay, fine, very very good. And then not just the hardware there. Remember all this hardware you're looking at, they have applications running on them. Okay, all this server, the database, they have applications on them, and then you have this paper records. Okay, so quite a number of things needs to be considered there. So that's what identifying that's what the risk identification is. And one of the best way of doing that is because if you're new to an organization, maybe your first day, your second day, everything is new to you. You're still trying to understand their business process. It's best to understand their services. What are they doing in this place? What kind of are they selling a product, or are they offering a service, or are they supplying somebody, or are they providing an IT service, or are they just try and understand what they're doing, and then try to have a diagram, like what you've just seen now. So you can imagine, you can now begin to join the dots together. Okay, this is the process. This person does this, that person does that. So from there, you begin to identify their assets. You begin to identify the things they use on daily basis. It's not just the hardware, even the applications that are running on the hardware, the people, that are the people that are interacting with technology, the people that are interacting with those applications, you need to identify all those risks. And that's why we have hardware, software, information in electronic form or paper, infrastructure, people, etc. Identifying threats means listing what can happen to those assets and which can have negative impact. What can happen to those assets and which can have negative impact, e.g., fire can affect hardware, viruses can affect software, equipment malfunction, key people leaving the organization. So that's the threat there. So the things that can happen to those assets which can have negative impact. You can imagine if let me go back there, sorry. You can imagine if an hacker succeed in gaining access to this web server, and then maybe or this database or this database here, like it happened to NHS few months ago when an hacker, just gain access and then they encrypt their records. So if an hacker gets access into this place now and they just encrypt all the records here, once it's encrypted, maybe that's a ransomware attack, So they just encrypt it. So once these records are encrypted, it rendered this organization useless because they can't do anything. They can't access their records. Okay, so anything that can happen to those things are the threat. You need to identify what can go wrong there. You need to identify what can go wrong. So you need to list them, what can happen to those assets which can have negative impact on the asset. Identify vulnerability means identifying why those threats can happen. I told you earlier on, the word vulnerability, another word for vulnerability means weakness. Weaknesses. And vulnerability is also another word for it is weaknesses. Identifying why those threats can happen. Lack of fire extinguisher can cause fire breakout. Lack of antivirus can lead to virus attack. Lack of replacement is a problem if key people are leaving the business. So you need to understand the weakness. So where's the vulnerability here? Where's the vulnerability? Where's the weakness here? So if you look at there's a lot of weaknesses in this diagram that I showed you earlier on. Sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of vulnerabilities here. If you look properly, as in there's a lot of weaknesses around here. If you look properly, there's a lot of vulnerabilities here. So you need to identify those vulnerabilities as well. For each risk identified, a risk owner must be assigned, and the person will be responsible for dealing with the risk. Risk identification is very important because in order to analyze and evaluate risk, you must first of all know which risk exists, because that's the first step. If you don't know, if you can't identify the asset, if you don't know the asset, how would you know the threat? Okay, how would you know the threat? So it's very, very important that your risk identification is very, very important, because there's no way you can analyze. How would you know how serious the risk is, and how would you be able to evaluate the risk? So you must first of all understand where the risk exists within your organization. And again, you're not going to be working alone, and the truth is you're going to be talking to asset owners. Okay, and in most cases, every risk has to have every risk will have to have a risk owner as well. So the person who is going to be responsible with dealing that risk. Okay, so if for instance now you're working for that charity organization that I've been showing you guys, and then they told you, okay, that's the database engineer there. So you're going to be sitting down with him. So what are the things that can go wrong with? I know you are the one managing this database. You are the one monitoring this. You are the owner of this asset. So what are the things that can go wrong? What are the things that can happen that will make you not to be able to perform your day-to-day activities? It will tell you, oh, if that goes wrong, if this happened, if that happened. So from there, you begin to gather your information. Those are risks there. So you now begin to think, so what can I do to mitigate that risk? What can I put in place? What control can we put in place to make sure that doesn't happen? Okay, so you're not gonna be the alpha and the omega. You're not gonna know it all. You're gonna be working as a team. So that's why you're gonna be interacting with this asset owner. So once you're able to identify the assets, you're gonna be interacting with their owners. For instance, you have identified a particular web server. That web server is hosting the company's maybe their main application that they use for their daily operations. You are asking the question, so who is the owner of that application? Who is in charge of that application? So okay, it's Mr. Smith. Okay, you are sitting there with Mr. Smith. I understand you are the one, you are the owner of this application. Yes. So you are there, you start asking question, what version is it? When was the last time how do you do your patching? Who supports us? Do we have a support contract with an external party who supports us? So how do you ensure that this application is up to date? He's going to tell you, that person will tell you, oh yeah, we have a third party, they are the one that apply the patches. If we need to upgrade, this is what we do. That person will give you all the information you need, and then from there you begin to identify the risk. That's the application itself. And then the IT guys that are managing the server, you get to talk to them as well. So when you interact with these people, as you're interacting with various functions within the business, you are going to start putting pen to paper, and you start joining the dots together. So okay, we have a server here, we have a server there. That's the application owner, that's the risk owner. You begin to see how the dots joins together. But it's your responsibility. If you are the one leading the ISMS project, if you are the project manager, or you are the information security officer, it's your responsibility to help them identify the risk there. So this is the element of risk assessment. So for risk identification, you have we've talked about assets, we've talked about threat, and we've talked about vulnerability. And then the risk analysis there is when you want to. I think I'm going to show you. You're going to see a table in the next slide that tells you how this risk analysis is done. So we have for risk identification. Once you identify the risk, under that, there must be, for you to have a risk, for you to have a risk. I think I mentioned this during our taster class. For you to have a risk, there must be a threat, and then there must be a vulnerability. There must be a threat, there must be a vulnerability. So if there's a threat and there's no vulnerability, there's no risk there. If there's a vulnerability and there's no threat, then there's no risk there. So just know that for you to have risk, there must be threats must be present, and then there must be vulnerability. I think I used an illustration back in the days, from storybooks that I've read when I was growing up. I was told that back home in Africa, people that sell farm produce, they just take their oranges, they put it in a tray, and they just put it on the street. If the orange that the person is selling maybe is 50 kobo or whatever, the person will just put 5 stones there. Just put 5 stones and then put the orange there, maybe a tray of orange and 5 stones. So when passerby comes around, they see the orange, they say, oh, they count the stones, it's 5 stones, so that means 50 kobo. So the person drops 50 kobo, takes the orange and goes away. Another passerby will come around, take the orange and go away. That was back then. So if you look at that scenario now, the fact that that product is on the street unattended, okay, that's a weakness there. That's a vulnerability. You have put your product on the street unattended, and there is money on your tray, okay? Your table is unattended. That's a weakness. So that's vulnerability. The threat at the passerby, okay? So that person that is passing by, someone can just be passing by, doesn't even intend to buy oranges, but the person is just passing by and he saw the orange and feel like, oh, I'm just going to take one orange and walk away. So that's a threat there. And the assets are the oranges, the farm produce. That's the assets for that person. So you can imagine if there are no threats, the oranges are there, the money is there on the tray, but no one is passing by. So there's no risk. There's no risk. Okay? And again, if there are threats, if people are passing by and then the oranges are not left unattended, someone is there manning the table there. Okay? So that means there's no vulnerability. There's no weakness there. So the threat is there, there's no weakness, but there's no risk. So for there to be a risk, there must be a threat and there must be vulnerability. There must be threat. Those two elements has to be present for you to say, oh, there is a risk here. There is a risk here. Okay, so those two elements has to be present. So that's why you have asset, threat, and vulnerability under risk identification, and then we have the risk owner, and then we have the risk analysis. So I'm going to talk about the impact and likelihood very, very shortly. So the risk here is the impact plus likelihood. So this is a risk assessment table. This is a risk assessment table. So it depends on okay, I think when I get to risk analysis, I'm going to talk more about that. Okay, so here we have, this is the asset, Remember, we are still in the plan phase. We have the asset, which is the records. We have the risk owner, which is the call center manager. I think this one refers to, let me show you. This refers to this one here. Yeah. So if you look at this one says records. The threat is unauthorized access to data, because this lady collects records from the public, the name and address, email address, maybe card details and all those stuffs, and then she brings them to the office, just leaves them on the floor, pile of paper records here. So this guy here, we just take one, enter it into their system and try to enter into their system so that they can capture that information on their system. That's what all these guys are doing here. So they're picking this paper record one after the other. So if you look here now, so because this paper record is just lying on the floor, maybe in the call center, they're just putting it somewhere, just lying on the floor. So that means somebody can gain unauthorized access to the data. Somebody can just walk by and just pick one of these paper record and just walk away. Somebody can gain unauthorized access to the data. So the vulnerability there is that records left in open areas. That's the weakness. The records were left in open areas. So that's the weakness here. So the risk owner is the call center manager. Okay, is the call center manager. So how do you determine the impact? How do you determine the likelihood? Some organizations will use scales. Some organizations will use like they can use high, medium, low. Okay, they can use high, medium, low. But in this instance now, if you look at the scale of 1 to 5, if this happens, what impact will it have on your organization? That's the question you're going to ask yourself. Okay, so if somebody gains an unauthorized access to data, to customer data, because this man here gave his data, gave his address, his email address. Oh yeah, you can write me, I'm going to support your charity, blah blah blah. That's my date of birth, this is my email, this is my house number, and then perhaps he filled in his card details, and then they put them on the floor, and then somebody gained access, unauthorized access to those data. So what impact will it have on your organization? On the scale of 1 to 5, what impact will it have? Because the moment somebody gains unauthorized access to this data, perhaps somebody might use it for fraud purposes. Okay, that is going to have a very negative impact on your organization. So on the scale of 1 to 5, I chose 4. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, I chose 4. So what is the likelihood that it might happen? What is the likelihood that this might happen? So on the scale of 1 to 5, I chose 3. Okay, so the risk here is the I plus L, and that's why you have 7 here. So that's why you have this here. Okay, so you can see risk there is impact plus likelihood. Impact plus likelihood. Okay, so the risk there is 7. So by the time we are evaluating risk, so before we get to this stage, the business they could have it in records and say, okay, whenever your risk is less than 5, it can wait. You don't have to action it immediately. But whenever your risk is greater than 7, you have to do something. Every organization will have their own appetite. Okay, so in this instance is 7. Okay, this is another asset here, database. You have the database here. Okay, this is your database. This is a database here, right? You are conducting risk assessment here. Okay, so this is a database. You look at the database. The risk owner is a customer operations manager. Okay, so hackers can compromise the security and access customer record. What is the vulnerability in this database? The vulnerability is the fact that the antivirus there is not up to date. The antivirus on this database, on this server, is not up to date. So if it is not up to date, that means there's a vulnerability. And if there's a vulnerability, hackers can take advantage of that, and then they can gain access to that system. Do you know that was what happened to NHS in May? That was what happened to NHS because Microsoft released a patch, to say, oh, if anybody is using Server 2012, I think maybe Microsoft Server 2008 or whatever, they said, okay, if you are still using this server, download this patch and apply these patches to your server. Okay, but the company providing those, the company looking after those services, looking after that server on behalf of NHS, perhaps they didn't do it on time, and because they didn't do it on time, the hackers gained access into that particular server, and they were able to encrypt their data. Okay, so that's exactly what can happen here. So if there's no up to date, that's why the systems, the servers, the antivirus on them has to be up to date. Whenever the vendors release patches, those patches will have to be downloaded and applied straight away. It has to be downloaded, although in some instances you have to go and test them in a test environment. They will make sure that it's not breaking something, and then they will apply the patches and all that. So that's a vulnerability here. So by the time you are talking to the database engineer and you're sitting and say, okay, can you tell me more about this about this server? How do you do the patching? Who does the patching for you? Well, we say, well, the contract is given to an outsource to a third party. They gain access, to a third party. A third party, they have remote access to this database, so they download the patch, they apply the patches. I just go there and do my own day-to-day stuff and all of that. So, and then maybe you check. By the time you check the version of the antivirus on the server, you realize that, oh my God, they've not even it hasn't been updated in the last 6 months. Okay, they've not even downloaded. Maybe the database is sitting somewhere in the corner of a server room or somewhere in a data center or whatever. So the moment you realize that they don't have an up-to-date antivirus installed on that system, that is a vulnerability. And because there's a vulnerability, there is always a threat. There are always threats out there. Hackers can compromise the security.
Hi, Dio.
Yes, please.
Hi, Dio. Sorry to interrupt you. Can I just ask something that fundamental that I don't want to miss in your example? This risk identification, what you're going through now.
Yeah.
Is it is this the current state of the organization or what needs to be in place? What I'm trying to say is, are you saying that when at that point in time when you're asking the question,
yeah,
are you basing the risk based on the fact that are you checking that they don't have up-to-date virus patch, or you're saying, or you're simply just saying, if you don't have up-to-date virus, this is what will happen? Does my question make sense? Are you checking whether they have something or not at that point in time, or you're just saying, okay, I know they have a server, and what I'm saying is, if you don't have up-to-date patch, this is what would happen?
Okay. I think
does my question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Like I said, this is just a typical example. There's so many things that can go wrong with a server. There's so many things that can go wrong. This is just a typical example. So if you find out that they don't have an up-to-date up-to-date antivirus, remember I told you that the moment you have a vulnerability and you have a threat, then there's a risk. The moment you have a vulnerability and you have a threat, then there's a risk.
Mm-hmm.
So the moment you realize that, whilst you are asking your questions, you realize that their antivirus is not up to date. That's a vulnerability there. And the truth is, hackers these days, you see, gone are the days whereby hackers are, what they do these days is, they have their hacking is automated, and hacker can be sleeping, and yet he set up his computer system to be doing all sorts of things on the internet. The guy, the main person, the perpetrator, he could be sleeping. So all these things are automated. So all those programs, they'll just send it, they'll just distribute it, and they'll be looking for weaknesses. Okay, so once that program hits that server, if the program hits that server, it checks for a weakness and finds out that, oh, the antivirus is not up to date. Oh, there's a vulnerability here. Okay, so when the hacker, maybe perhaps he was sleeping, when he wakes up, he's going to check his system and say, oh, I think I found something here. I can take advantage of that server. So you are looking at the state of the equipment as of that day.
As of that, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes
as
sense.
of
Thanks.
that day, as of today, what is the state of this server as of today? Okay, so once you know the state of the server as of that day, that's once you find the weakness, once you find the vulnerability, then you need to tell them, oh, this is a vulnerability. Then you identify the threat as well. So you document the threat. Okay, and of course it is assigned to a risk owner. Okay, for instance, now, so if you look at the impact, if an hacker should compromise that server, if an hacker should compromise this database, somebody has gained unauthorized access to it, and then maybe they've encrypted all their information there, what impact will it have on this charity organization? The impact is going to be 5. It's going to be maximum impact, because it's going to render their operations useless. They cannot do anything. The same way those NHS trusts that was affected back in May, the same way they could not do anything is the same way this organization, this charity organization, will not be able to function. Their customer service operations will be grounded. So the impact is 5. So what is the likelihood? The likelihood is 4, because there is a weakness already here. So it's only a matter of time before hackers discover that there's a vulnerability here, and they will take advantage of it. And that's why you have risk to be 9. So you can see that's a very high risk. Okay.
That makes sense. Because I wasn't sure whether, as a risk information consultant, whether I understand what you said about, obviously what needs to be in place, the vulnerability and then the threat needs to be in place for there to be risk. So I wasn't sure whether it's part of your role. Let's take the records, the unauthorized records. If you go there and they're not leaving papers unattended, whether, let's say they were leaving papers unattended, there's a risk, so you have to document the risk. I don't know whether it's part of your job to say, let's say you get there and there's no paper records, whether it's part of your job to say, if you leave paper records there, then XYZ could happen. That's what I was trying to get clear in my head, that you just, like you said, is there a risk there at that point in time? Yes, there is. But if there isn't a risk, is it part of your job to document what can happen if they leave paper records there? That was the premise of my question. But the way you explain it makes sense.
When we get to auditing, what you just mentioned now. If an auditor comes to an organization to audit that, if they come and audit them here right now, right, and then they find out that, oh, there are no paper records at all, the auditor can make notes and say, oh, I found some best practice, I found some good practices there. They don't leave any paper. On there's no paper anywhere. They've been following their clear desk policy. They don't leave papers unattended, so there's nothing anywhere. Even auditors check bins. You can imagine, they check their bin. They just to check if somebody has dropped in confidential information into the bin and all those things. So they can just make a side comment. Okay, so your function is to look for risk. So if the risk is not there, there's no point you saying, well, the risk is not there. As part of the awareness training, you can mention it and say, well, we have a clear desk policy here. We have a confidential waste there. So if you need to dispose of any confidential information, you put it in the confidential waste. You can train that, you can inform them as part of the awareness. But if the risk is not there,
okay,
you get what I'm saying now. So I do. Yeah, so if they're not flying papers around, that means there's no vulnerability. There's no vulnerability, okay? So if there's no vulnerability, then that means there's no risk there as of that day. You could come back another time and meet something else, But remember, they've brought you in to come and help them with their ISMS project. So part of you planning for the project, you're trying to get your risk assessment table ready. So you're walking around, you're looking at things, you're looking at how they perform their day-to-day operations, you're observing them, okay, and you're making notes of what they're doing. Yeah. So I hope your question is clear now, right? Okay.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Thanks, Dio.
Okay. So the third one there I talked about is about the web server. This is the web server here. This is the web server where they host their application. So this web server, when people try to log in into this charity organization, to register their interest, to say, okay, we're going to be supporting you. This is how much I'm going to be giving you. These are my details. They interact with the application. The application sits in this web server. So now that web server, you observed that web server has no UPS. Okay, so if something goes wrong, if somebody tripped an electrical cable, if there's a power surge, if something just goes wrong somewhere, and then that web server gets powered down, so what's going to happen to all these people that are trying to interact with that application sitting in this server? So there's no UPS, so that's a vulnerability out there. And then the threat is power outage. There could be a power outage. Okay, there could be a power outage, and then the risk owner is the head of IT. But the impact is going to be 4 if it happens. If that risk should materialize, the impact on your business is going to be 4. But what is the likelihood? The likelihood is 2. So that means it's not likely to happen. It's not that it can happen, but it's not likely to happen. So I've assigned 2 here. So on a scale of 1 to 5, I've assigned 2. So and then the risk here is 6. Okay. So if you look at this, when we get to ISO, when in terms of information security management risk assessment, there's what we call the risk acceptance. The risk acceptance, because you're going to get to a point that when you identify a risk and you have documented it and you have made it clear to the business that, look, there's a risk here. So somebody can own up and say, you know what, we're going to accept that risk. We're going to accept that risk. We can't put a UPS there, but if we try to put UPS there, we might break something. We don't want to shut down our servers, or we can't do that now until after the bank holidays, or we're going to do that when we're doing a general maintenance. We're going to put a UPS. So they're going to sign it off. Somebody's going to accept the risk and sign it off and say, okay, well, they've signed off the risk. So this is your risk assessment table. I hope it is clear now how to do, risk assessment. Yeah, going forward, risk analysis now. This is the assessment of the impact, which we've just talked about anyway. I think I've talked about this, but let me just read it for you. This is the assessment of the impact of the risk and the likelihood that the risk will materialize. The analysis should focus on the impact of the risk on confidentiality, availability, and integrity. You remember our security goals? So if you come here, yeah, so where is it? Sorry. Here. So if you look at, so you can tell me, in fact, you can tell me what will happen here. So if this should materialize, what security goal will that affect? What will it affect if this should happen? What's going to happen? What will it affect in terms of the security goals? I'm sure you remember what the security goals are.
Confidentiality. So access to records, confidentiality.
Yeah. So how about this?
Confidentiality. The integrity. They could also change it. And actually, all three, potentially all three. Depending on who the threat is. I think all three. If somebody who's technical, they can affect the integrity.
Okay.
And potentially all three for the second one.
Okay. So Bisola, are you referring to the first one as your confidentiality? Bisola, are you referring to the first one? Okay, fine, you are correct. So this second one, so how about this third one? I'm going to talk about the second one shortly. How about this one? In terms of our security goals, what's it going to affect? If this risk should materialize, what part of security goal will it affect? This one here.
Availability.
Availability, because if it happens, if the web server is down, that's availability. That's fine. So this one says hackers can compromise the security and access, customer records. In most cases, although like you said, they could tamper with it, but when hackers are trying to access customer records, sometimes in most cases they want to steal the records. People want to steal credit card details and all those things. But the moment they observe that they can't do anything to it, they will rather encrypt the data. They will make it useless for you. They will encrypt the data, and then that's why they call it ransomware attack. It's the word ransomware attack. So once they gain access to this database, they will encrypt it, and then they will just put a message there and say, oh, for your information, your database has been encrypted. So if you want us to de-encrypt it, you need to go and pay this amount. That's why they call it ransomware. So they will obtain money from the owners before they will de-encrypt the data. Okay. So in terms of control, when we get to control, you are going to see what we can do. You are going to see what can be done to such things when we get to controls. Okay. So where are we? We are risk analysis. We're talking about risk analysis. So you assess the impact assessment scale. You look at how it will affect the impact of the risk on confidentiality, availability, and integrity of information. Companies can choose different assessment scales for the impact and likelihood. The scale can be high, medium, and low. Those of us the people who have project management background will understand what that means. And then, of course, it could be numerical values 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, as we saw in the previous slide. All these decisions must be documented in the risk assessment methodology. Okay, remember I told you the first step is a risk assessment methodology. How do we assess this risk? So they will have decided that, okay, we're going to for our impact and likelihood is going to be a scale of 1 to 5 or a scale of 1 to 10, or we're going to be using high, medium, and low. All of that needs to be documented. Based on the perceived impact and likelihood, the level of the risk will be determined. The formula can also be documented in the risk assessment methodology. Okay, yes, and so this is the example I gave you earlier. If the web server is down, the information stored in the server becomes unavailable, or if the paper is accessed by unauthorized person, then the confidentiality is endangered. You guys are doing well, so you got that right. So that's what risk analysis is about. Risk evaluation. So there's a clear difference between risk analysis and risk. Remember, risk assessment comprises of risk identification. Risk assessment comprises of risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. Risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. So those are the three elements that forms that one. So when you're talking about risk assessment, when somebody is saying I need to do a risk assessment, so that means it's going to identify an asset, it's going to analyze, it's going to identify an asset, it's going to identify a risk, and then it's going to analyze the risk, and the person is going to evaluate the risk. So that's what the person is saying when he says I want to do a risk assessment. So this means the organization needs to decide which risk is acceptable or not based on the previously established methodology. This step is important because all risks that are not acceptable have to be treated. For instance, now they could have put it in their documentation and say any risk that is below 5, we can accept it. Any risk that is below 5, we can accept it. So when they look at the likelihood and they look at the impact, and then the sum of the two is below 5, maybe it's 3. Oh, that's we can ignore that. Let's try and change the figures and see what it's going to look like. If, for instance, now, if you find out that this risk, probability that this risk is going to happen is maybe 1, no, and if the impact is, maybe let's say the impact is 2, and then the likelihood that it's going to happen is 1, so that gives us 3 here. So you can see it's very low. So they could tell you, well, we have the paper records. Indeed. You have the paper records indeed in a file somewhere in the office, but the truth is nobody can enter that office without a smart card. It's a secured area. Okay, it's a secured area. Or not, even some of the employees that works in that organization cannot gain access to that place. So assuming this whole place is a secured area, maybe you need to swipe a card, you need to enter a PIN, before you can gain entrance into the place. So that tells me that anybody who is not authorized to be within this environment will not be in that environment, because in terms of physical security, they have a barrier, they have a swipe, and then they have a PIN before they can gain access. So what that means is the probability, the likelihood of it occurring is 1. Even though the vulnerability is still there, the record are still left in the open, and then the threat is not 0. It's not that it's not possible, but the likelihood is reduced because it's in a secured environment. So this kind of risk, the organization could say, you know what, we are going to accept that risk. Okay, so that they are going to tell you, oh, that is within our risk appetite. But they could say anything that is above 6 has to be treated somehow. We have to do something. We're not just going to look at it. Has to be treated. We're going to get to risk treatment plan very shortly. Here. Where did we stop? Have we been here? No. Okay, yeah, this is risk treatment. I'm sure you understand what risk evaluation is now before we go into risk treatment. So this is where they decide which risk are we going to accept, which one are we going to, that's where you evaluate it. You evaluate the risk. That's what it means. So the next one, this is where we have the risk treatment. This is very, very important. If you have been hearing, how do I treat a risk? This is what it means to treat a risk, okay? So all risks that are not acceptable to the business will have to be treated. Selecting the appropriate controls wisely is crucial for security and from the business point of view. The risk treatment options includes the following, okay? So the number one risk treatment is to apply a control. That's the number one risk treatment. Maybe you got to find out that each of those ladies that are sitting on the computers, you realize that their systems are not passworded. They just switch on their system and then they just go straight and log into the application, or the main application that they're using. You don't need to sign in. It's not passworded. So you can say, wow, that means if somebody should gain unauthorized access to your system now, somebody can just access your CRM, and then that person begins to do all sort of things. So you can say, oh, you need to implement. I need to write a password policy for you guys. So once I write the password policy, I'll pass it on to the IT guys, and then the IT guys will implement it. So in your password policy, you might say, oh, you must use 10 characters, and you must use 2 special characters for the policy. And then the IT guys will implement it. So the next time they get to the office, once they switch on their system, the system is going to ask them for password. It's going to tell them you need to change your password, and that password must not be less than 10 characters, and it must have 2 special characters. So that is you applying controls. Okay, that is you applying controls, and all the controls that you will ever need, most of the controls you will need, they are in Annex A of that document you have with you. That Annex A is a catalog of controls, 114 in total. Okay, but in this instance now, you can, like that risk assessment table that we showed you regarding the web server that doesn't have a UPS, you can implement one. You can get a UPS. So that means you have applied the control. So you have treated the risk. So the moment the control is implemented, the risk has been treated. Another option for treating risk is to accept the risk, especially when the cost of implementation is more expensive than the impact. When the cost of implementation is more expensive than the impact, then you have to you have to accept the risk. If the cost of, because one of the things you look at is, okay, for me to treat this risk, how much is it going to cost me, right? How much is it going to cost me? Oh, this for you. If you have you have a shed in your garden, in your garden, in the back of your house, you have a shed, right? And then in that shed, maybe you still keep some stuffs there, and then somebody tells you somebody around your street came around and knock at your door and tells you, well, we are selling security products. This is a burglar alarm. This burglar alarm, we can fit it on your shed. So if anybody wants to gain unauthorized access to your shed, the burglar alarm is going to go off. Okay? And then they tell you, so, oh, that's fine. So how much is this burglar alarm? And then they tell you, well, the one time you are going to pay installation fee of 200, and every month we're going to be charging you £100 for the burglar alarm that you want to fit on your shed. And then you are going to ask yourself, what am I keeping in the shed that I'm going to be paying this amount for? But somebody will tell you, but you have few stuffs there. Somebody can come into your shed and steal these things. In that instance, you are going to say, you know what, I'm going to accept the risk. Because the cost of treating the risk is too much. If I'm going to install a burglar alarm because of my shed, and I'm going to be paying £100 direct debit because I have few stuffs, things that we don't use often. That's what I have in the shed. So that means in that instance, you will say, you know what, you can go away with your product. I know there's a risk that an intruder can gain access to my shed and steal some of these things, but I'll rather live with that risk than to be paying this amount. So you can accept a risk. So it also happens in the workplace. Okay, they will look at the risk and say, you know what, instead of us trying to treat this risk, let's accept it. Maybe it's more expensive. The cost of treating it is more expensive than the impact. But when it comes to regulation, if the risk is around regulation, it's around compliance. You cannot say, well, if it's a regulation, I told you about regulatory standard. If it's a regulation, compliance is mandatory. In that instance, you cannot accept the risk. You have to treat it. So if you find out that, look, this paper records you guys are just putting on the floor here, there is personal data here. Okay, there is personal data here. If an unauthorized person should gain access to this personal data, it's gonna be a problem for the data subject. And then regulators will fine your organization. They will fine you thousands of pounds. Okay. The other day when a young 18-year-old in Northern Ireland, hacked into TalkTalk, and then records of about 186,000 customers was exposed. The confidentiality was breached. 186,000 was hacked into. TalkTalk was fined £400,000. Look at that cost. You look at that impact. £400,000. Now, for if you're working for TalkTalk, what it will cost them to implement a control to say, you know what, all this data that we have here, why don't we encrypt it? Perhaps it's not going to cost them more. If you're going to hire a contractor, if you're going to hire a security engineer to come and do stuff on those things, perhaps you will pay the contractor like £500 a day, and by the time the guy does maybe works there for like 2-3 weeks, the work is done. Okay, so now compare that to you paying a fine of 400,000 pounds. So you look at the cost of implementation and then you look at the impact. So if the cost is higher than the impact, in most cases, if the cost is higher than the impact, organizations will tell you we are going to accept that risk. You can also avoid the risk. Remote working may be discontinued instead of investing heavily on an infrastructure change. That is an example. That is an example of avoiding risk. If somebody tells you, well, I want to start working remotely, and then you realize that, oh, if you're going to be working remotely, that could be risky because we are going to be exposed somewhere. And then you say, you know what, I don't have option, I need to work remotely. And then they say, maybe we need to do some change here for us to set up our VPN. We need to procure some equipment. We need to do this. We need to do that. So they'll tell you, you know what, instead of us going that route, we'd rather avoid it. So we'd rather say nobody should work from home. So instead of us starting another project to say, okay, we want to set up VPN so that people can work remotely and all those things, we'd rather avoid it. So everybody should come to the office. If you can't come, fine, but everybody should work from here. Nobody's going to be allowed to work remotely. That's avoiding the risk. You can also transfer the risk. Okay, so you can outsource part of the business. You know, a common thing that businesses does is they outsource their e-commerce. You know, when you go online to make some purchases from some website, the moment you want to you click on checkout, you just find out that they are taking you to another website to pay. Maybe you have to pay with WorldPay, you have to pay with PayPal, you have to pay with a payment merchant. What they have done is to outsource the risk. They don't want to deal with card. That website doesn't. The owner of that organization, they don't want to deal with anything that has to do with payment card because they don't want to get into trouble because they know there is a risk there. So they would rather transfer it. They would rather outsource that part of the business. They say, you know what? We know for every product we sell, our profit on every product we sell is about £20. Why don't we give £3 to PayPal so that we get £17 and then PayPal will be managing the payment for us. So at least we are not going to bother our head about any risk of data loss, of card holder details and all those stuffs. So they can transfer it. Also, they can buy insurance. That's why we buy insurance. You are transferring risk. When we buy insurance, your house insurance, your motor insurance, you are trying to transfer the risk so that if something happens, if there is a fire outbreak, if something happens, then you can go to the insurance and say, well, something has happened, you need to do this and all that. However, you may transfer risk, but you cannot transfer the consequence. So even if your office is insured, okay, and then your office get burnt down, and then you go to your insurance to say our office is burnt down, you need to pay us, and all that. The consequence is that your office is burnt down. So you can't transfer that consequence, even though the insurance will pay you some money and say, well, because you are insured, we're going to pay you some money, but the consequence is going to live with you. So for the risks to decrease, relevant controls should be selected from Annex A. It contains 114 controls. So controls not in Annex A can also be used. So the list in Annex A is not exhaustive. So you could find yourself in scenarios whereby the control you need is not even in Annex A, but you think this thing has to be done. Okay, so it doesn't matter. So the standard requires that the information from the risk treatment be documented. So these are the 4 ways through which you can treat a risk. So we have identified our asset, we have identified the risk, we have done the evaluation, and now we're trying to look at the risk treatment. What option are we going to go for? So for every risk that you have identified, that each of those risks needs to be treated, especially the risks that are not acceptable. If it's a risk that is within the risk appetite of the organization, that means that risk is acceptable. Okay, for that one you can ignore because it is acceptable. But if it is not within their appetite, that risk has to be treated. And this is one of you can choose any one of these options to treat the risk. Statement of applicability. This is a very important document when in terms of information security management system project. When you are managing an ISMS project or you're working on an ISMS project, this is it's a very, very important document. That's why it's here. It's a mandatory document required by ISO 27001. The certification auditor will use it for the main guideline for the certification audit. Remember, the end goal of everything you're doing in this ISMS project is to bring your organization to a point whereby an external auditor is going to come, they're going to audit them, and after the audit, they will issue them with a certificate and say, you are now ISO 27001 certified. Okay, so that's your end goal. So this document is one of the documents the auditor will be requesting for. So this document shows the security profile of your company. It lists all the applicable controls from Annex A and the additional controls that might be identified in the risk treatment process. It will also include the justification of the selected controls and the reason for exclusion of other controls. So as you can see here, you have if you go into I think I should show you this one. If you go to Annex A of your document, we're still going to go into, I'm still going to talk through, I'm still going to talk about the sections in Annex A. But if you go to, let me see where the page is. Yeah, page 12. Page 12 of your document, page 12, you can see information classification. It's a control there. So the clause is for asset management, information classification there, applicability, if it applies to you, yes. And what's the justification? Maybe you identify some risk in your risk number, you have the risk that you have identified. This is just an example anyway. You know, you have identified the risk and you have agreed with the company XYZ. This is the risk that we have identified. So how do you implement? You document in the classification policy. What's the status? It has been implemented. So this is just talking about information classification. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that at some point. I'm going to show you how to classify information. Physical security, and then this is physical security. The control objective is secured areas. Secured areas has to be physically protected. In this instance, is it applicable? No, not applicable. Perhaps the organization, they have all their systems in the cloud. You know, they don't have physical servers in their environment. You know, all their applications is web-based. So everything they do, they save, they store, everything they do, it's in the cloud. Maybe it's somewhere in a data center somewhere. So in that kind of a place, they will not necessarily need to have a secured areas. They will not necessarily need a secured areas. And that's why you see implementation method there is not applicable and the status is not applicable. So this is what a statement of applicability looks like, just to show the control you have chosen. It will just show the control you selected, the control you have used to treat the risk you identify, and then you will tell us the justification. Why are you taking this control, or why are you not taking it? And then implementation method, how did you implement it? So that's what statement of applicability is all about. And it's a document that it has to be documented because it is a requirement according to ISO 27001. The main purpose of the risk treatment plan is to define exactly who is going to implement each control, in which time frame, with which budget. This document is the link between the plan phase and the do phase. We are still in the plan phase. You can imagine, this risk treatment plan is the link between the plan phase and the do phase. So the plan should list all the controls that are to be implemented with the relevant details about implementation. ISO 27001 requires this clause to be documented. So you must have a risk treatment plan. Having identified the risk, okay, you have selected the controls. You have decided that, this is a control that we need to implement in order to treat this risk. So that means you need to have a plan in place. You need to have a plan in place. So that's what this requirement is talking about here, and it has to be documented. So this is an example of a risk treatment plan. So this risk treatment plan is, as you can see here, it's going to be, it has the person who is, you can see from here, we have the controls to be implemented. So this is your implementation. So this is the plan that we go into the project managers. If you can use Microsoft Project, okay, by the time you want to put all those plans together, so this element here, we go into your project plan. These controls to be implemented, it will go into your project plan. So if you're working for a large organization where the information security officer is different from the project manager, okay, so all of this, the project manager wants this. He wants to see what you want to do, Okay, so these are the controls that we want to implement. For instance, now for records that are kept in open space, we want to buy a cabinet with lock for protection of paper records. Okay, the person responsible is a customer service manager. The deadline is December, and the resources that we need is finances for the cabinet, and then the result, we are still awaiting the implementation. Okay, so this, in reference to this risk, protection of paper records, unauthorized persons can access customer records. Remember, I showed you that diagram where we have the paper records on the floor. So we're trying to mitigate that risk. So we're now trying to treat it. So we now said, okay, what we're going to do for now, because this organization is using paper, we're going to buy a cabinet with a lock for protection of paper records. So the records are not going to be on the floor. It's not going to just going to be by the side of the room. It's going to be lock up somewhere. Also, we're going to implement a smart card physical entry controls. Reference to this risk, this is just an example. Laptops could be stolen by external persons. If there is no smart card physical entry system into that hall, into that office space, into that open office, if people can just walk in and walk out, somebody can just walk in and walk away with a laptop. And that's why in many organizations, in most organizations, there will always be a physical barrier, and they will give you a swipe. You need to swipe in, you need to swipe out. Even if it's a glass barrier, there will always be a glass. That is to deter unauthorized persons from gaining entrance into their premises. Okay, the person responsible for this is the IT operations manager, and this is the deadline that you have given them, that this has to be done. Okay, so this is the resources needed: 3 working days for a contractor, finances for the technical. Oh, I think I made a mistake there. Yeah, sorry about the typo. That con there is supposed to be configuration, finances for the technical configuration, and then in the process of implementation, for the result side, it's in the process of implementation, but the deadline has passed. So this is just an example of a risk treatment plan. So this is what it means to formulate a risk treatment. Yeah. So that's the end of the class today. I don't want to exceed 2 hours because I realize that when you are longer than that, people, you will not be able to assimilate again. We are not done yet. I thought we can finish today. We are not done yet. Where we are right now is the do phase. Where we ended up is the do phase. We are just about entering, the do phase, as you can see here. So the do phase is where we are. We still need to go to we have plan, do, check, and act. So we still need to talk about the check and the act there, because after you have finished your ISMS, when you have finished the project needs to start running. Okay, the project, you're not just doing these things for the doing, because everything you're doing is going to be integrated into their day-to-day operations of that organization. So that needs to run. The policies you have written, the controls that has been implemented, you need to see it practicalized. You need to see it running. You need to see. So management needs to see the effectiveness, because they have committed budget into your hand to say, okay, how much would you need for the ISMS project? Oh, you're going to, from what you've said, you're going to, maybe from when you did the risk assessment, and then you've been able to, to do the costing, you've been able to identify all the resources that you need to implement all those controls for you. And then maybe at the end of the day, you're coming up with a budget of 150,000. Okay, they say, okay, fine, we're gonna give you that money and all of that. So once that is done, management will now want to see if the ISMS is effective. They want to see the impact of that project on their day-to-day activities. They want to see if the number of incidents they've been seeing in terms of security incidents, they want to see if the number of incidents will be reduced. Okay, they want to see how people are complying with the policies, with the rules. So the ISMS has to run. So it's not that when you finish implementation today, today we finished, everything has been implemented, so tomorrow let me go and bring in the assessor. No, you still have to run the ISMS. You have to make sure it runs. So when it runs, and then if everything is fine, even when it's running, you can still find some loopholes somewhere which you still need to plug. You can find some gaps, and you still need to plug those gaps. Okay, so but when everything is running, you're looking at the metrics. Okay, the number of incidents has reduced, security incidents has reduced drastically, people are complying with the policies. So that means your ISMS is working. You have now just set up a system for them. Okay, and then once that is running, then you can now say, okay, let's go and bring the assessor will now come in and all that. So, I mean, we're going to talk about more of that in the next on Friday. So this coming Friday, I'll round off this bit. I'll round off this bit. I will make sure I'll be fast about it, and then I'll talk about Annex A on Friday as well. And then if we can talk more about risk management, like I said, we still need to talk about ISO 31000. That's the risk management framework which is applicable to any industry, because the risk management we talked about here now is applicable to information security but that other one is applicable to any industry, although they are very, very similar, to be honest, just very minor differences. It's almost the same thing, but it has its own it's a standard on its own, ISO 31000. That it's applicable to any industry out there. So I will introduce that one to you guys on Friday as well, and then we'll finish up this bit. So let's end it there. It's time for questions, please. Time for questions. Unmute yourself and talk to me, please.
Hi, Dio.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think the one thing that I've picked up that comes across as a bit daunting is identification of assets.
Okay.
Assets. Can I assume that you're not expected to reinvent the wheel? That if there are templates out there, so rather than, obviously I know you need to go around when you get to an organization, you need to go around and speak to, identify all the the process and the people.
Yeah.
But can our jobs be made easier?
Yeah, it's just that's there are some ways you teach people and you just teach them raw, but in practice out there we have what we call asset inventory. Asset inventory. Okay. The network guys, they will always have an inventory. They know all their assets. Those network guys, the guys managing the day-to-day IT operations of the organization, they know their assets. Any organization that does not have an asset inventory is not a serious organization. So they will have assets in the inventory. Okay. In very large organizations, in fact, they have applications that they use in monitoring those assets. You remember, assets is not just hardware. Even the softwares, all the applications they are using, they are all assets. So you could be asking, so do you have an asset inventory? That's the starting point. Oh, they told you, yes, we have but the problem is sometimes the inventory is not updated. Because if the inventory was, maybe that asset inventory, maybe they had it maybe since they've had it maybe for like 5 years, and then the last time that the inventory was updated maybe last year. So that means all the projects, all the things that has happened within the organization in the last 1 year, they've not updated their inventory asset into that inventory. So that means it's incomplete. That's where the problem is. So if the inventory is a live document whereby for every time they implement a new project, if they procure new device, if they add something to this network, or they remove a server, or they had a software, they install the new software, all of that needs to be updated. That inventory, that inventory needs to be updated. So if it is not updated, if it's not up to date, that's where the problem is. Okay, so if it is up to date, that makes your job easy. So you can just look at it. Okay, they have this data center, they have that data center. This is the number of servers they have. This is the number of applications they have. So you now can start asking questions. So who is the owner of this server? Where is this server located? What sort of data do you have on this server? That one makes your job easy. But if they tell you, well, we have an inventory actually, but it's not up to date, that's a problem. So if it's not up to date, so that means you have to painstakingly go from department to department and you start asking questions. You go to department head. So in your department, what do you do in this department? What do you deliver in this department? What kind of service do you render in this department? Where is your input coming from? So when you try to understand their business process, that's when you get to know what they use, for their day-to-day operations, which you can now begin to pencil down. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, because I was thinking along the lines of something that you bring to work, like a template of types of inventory, or at least how the groups of inventory. So to use that to direct the question. So if you go back to the example that you used, the diagram.
Yeah.
So maybe like a spreadsheet that I had, I would list all the types, like an exhaustive list of all the types of inventory. Maybe not all the lower level, but just a high level. So you get to a place that might say, okay, storage, then you tick yes or no. So you take that to them, and say, do you have servers? So you have a list or drop down a spreadsheet. I would say servers. You have servers. Yes, you tick yes. Do you have storage facilities? Do you have like paper storage? No. Is that something that in your experience,
that
something
could
that
help
you
as well. That could help as well. You know, the truth is that could help as well. But the truth is, there is no organization that is the same. There's no two organizations that are the same. There will always be differences here and there. But that if you have a template which can guide you, of course, that could help as well. You know, for instance, now for every organization that are processing information, that are processing stuff, you know, definitely they have switches, they have routers, you know, they have servers. You know, those things are constant. The question is, how many do you have and where are they? Do you know that because there are some instances whereby they are not even aware that there's a server somewhere. Maybe the last time the server was patched was 4 or 5 years ago, and they're using the server, and that server contains some sensitive information which they've completely forgotten. The last time they update, maybe by the time when you ask for their network diagram, you looked at it, that server was not even represented on the diagram. Okay, so getting to know those things, that's where the issue, where the problem might be. You know, that's where the problem is. But if you have a template which you can think, of course, anything that can be of help, anything that can be of help.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dayo.
Questions, please. Any other person? So are we saying we have, if we understand everything I've been saying in the last 2 hours? Bisola, question. Wale, question. Wale, are you there? Can you hear me, Wale?
Dayo,
Yeah, question, please.
I'm here. Yeah.
Do you have any question?
I don't have any questions. What I've just based on the last 2 days session.
Yep.
A lot of the things that we're doing makes a lot of sense to me now because last year I worked on a project that we had to do ISO 27001 certification, and we also had to prepare some ISMS policies to meet SEC audit.
Okay.
So, but then I was just working on it as part of the project management team. I wasn't the security specialist or anything.
Okay, so it's making sense to you now.
A lot of it is making sense. I mean, it's a lot of documents to put together because wow, I mean I can just remember those things coming. So it's making perfect sense to me now. Thank you. I don't have any questions.
Okay, good to know. So we're just starting. So I'm gonna be what I want to do is I'm gonna be showing you, like I said, I'm gonna show you what the certificate looks like, and I'm gonna be showing you policies as well. One of the things I want us to learn to do is to write policies, because as an information security officer, one of those things that organization will expect you to be able to do is your ability to write policies, and that's why I want us to use that our disaster charity organization, to look at them, to carry out a risk assessment, and then to write policies for them. What can we do to help this organization? So we're going to do that at some point. Though we're not going to start now because we still have a lot of grounds to cover. You know, it's not just ISO 27001. There's a lot of regulations, you know, that will be affecting these people. We need to put all of that into consideration. So that's why perhaps we will wait until when we get into Data Protection Act and the GDPR before, you know. But you can start looking at it now. You can start looking at this and start putting pen to paper. If you can start identifying the risk, identifying the vulnerabilities, and then, you know, start putting your tables together. You know, you can start doing some bits and pieces about it. Okay, you can go online and go and search for vulnerabilities that are pertained, you know, to web servers, to database. What can affect database? What can affect a web server? What can affect firewalls? You can go online and begin to do your research. What are the common vulnerabilities to firewalls? What are the common vulnerabilities to web server? What are the common vulnerabilities to database? You can start doing that, because in the real world, you know, when you have all this information at hand, by the time you get to the organization, you will be able to ask them the right questions, because you will have done your due diligence, you have done your research. So you know the common vulnerabilities that could affect switches. So you're going to be asking them, so what control do you have against this, against that? So by the time they answer you, you will get to know their level. You will know where they are in terms of security. And then you will get to know the amount of work that you need to do. Okay, so please just try and do some. Don't just, at the end of this class, don't just switch off your computer and say, okay, the next class is on Friday. Try and go over these classes and make notes, please. So on Friday, on Friday we're gonna finish this on Friday, and if we can do what's it called? If we can go into ISO 31000, I will just show you about that one as well. It's that one too is about risk management. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining the class. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and have a good week ahead. God bless you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Daya.
All right.
Have
Bye.
a lovely evening.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.